I want to thank Martha so much for having me here at Woodstock. It's quickly becoming my wife and I's home away from home. We love this place. It's spectacular. Are there any people in the audience that are writers or anticipating to be writers? Yeah. So I would just share with you a little bit how my adventures with God came to be before I tell my story. I'll make it quick. And that is catastrophe is how it happened. In 2008, I had a catastrophe, and my doctor in Los Angeles said, "You should be dead." Now, I don't know at what year of medical school they go through bedside manners. It was disturbing. I was disturbed for a few seconds. Then I thought it was funny, and then I thought it was inspiring. Like, what would happen if I really was dead? What would it be that I wanted my children to know about their father? And so, as a recuperative sort of thing, I began to write true stories about my life that I wanted my two boys to know about me. And it just so happened that those stories, at the time, a student at Harvard called me up and said, "Would you like to do a storytelling podcast?" And I said, "Well, sure." And that became the Tobolowsky Files. And then after that, radio stations, NPR and PRI, picked up some of those stories, played them nationally. And then Simon & Schuster said, "Would you like to turn some of the stories into a book?" And that became the Dangerous Animals Club, the stories for my boys. Well, a few months after the book came out, my editor called me up and said, what Simon & Schuster was getting feedback on was that people loved the humor in the stories, but they were really responding to a spiritual sort of connection in the stories. And would it be possible for me to write another book of true stories, but connected together with just spiritual fabric of like the spiritual life of man? I said, sure. I had no idea what I was going to write, but I thought, hey, they asked me to write a book. I'd be crazy to say no. And then I got this idea that at the time was just an excuse, but it became inspiring to me, not inspired, but inspiring. And that is, I realized in my life, and everybody I'd known, that our lives kind of fit the template of the 5 books of Moses in the Torah, in the Old Testament. And we all have a Genesis. These are usually first stories we tell on a first date with the first glass of Chardonnay about who we are, what our family is, where we came from, what our aspirations are, what our terrors are. And then we all go into slavery, just like in the book of Exodus. Except instead of building pyramids, we lose ourselves to first loves and terrible first jobs. Some of us lose ourselves to drugs and alcohol, or some people just staying in graduate school forever. But then we get out, and like the children of Israel in the Bible, we find we're still lost in the desert. And then we have what I call a Leviticus moment. At least in my life, this is when I got married to Anne. Where's Anne? There she is. She's the reason why I'm alive. I got married to Anne. I became a father. I returned to Judaism, and with a vengeance. Then we are shaped by mortality, like in the book of Numbers. And finally, if we're lucky, we end up in the book of Deuteronomy where, like Moses talking to the Hebrew people, we tell our stories to our children or anyone else who will listen to try to make sense of what the journey was about in the first place, the Pentateuch. So as I kept writing my true stories, I was thinking, this template seems to be truer and truer than I could imagine. And the other complication is that when you're writing a story that somehow involves God, what are you talking about? It's very difficult to know, because certainly the God I knew from Bible stories when I was a child was certainly different than when I found God in my girlfriend's eyes in my 20s. and very different from when I found God in rock and roll, with the help of a slight bit of cannabis in my 30s. And different from the profound wisdom I found in the Torah when I returned to Judaism. I guess I came back to a kind of conservative, orthodox sort of shul. When I came back to Judaism in my 40s, I thought, this is so profound and so wonderful. It transformed me again, and I needed that because that is when I lost my mother, my dear friend Bob, even the pooch. All of those deaths affected me. And the story I'm going to tell you tonight is from the book, My Adventures with God, but it's from the last section, the Deuteronomy section. And it is about an event that changes me to this day, even at this moment. I have experienced a miracle, a real one. I don't mean just finding a place to park in Woodstock. It is, I even cringe when I hear when people say, we're going to hear a story about miracles. I feel like I'm that close to being at a country music awards ceremony. But I experienced this, and I'm going to share it with you, and I'm not shy. We can discuss. You feel free to disagree. I think the problem with miracles and why they're in such disrepute is not because of belief. My experience with humankind is that people can believe anything. I think the problem is that we don't really have a good working definition. In today's world, our day and time, the main two ways we experience a miracle are either stories in the Bible or movies on the Hallmark Channel. And they see miracles completely differently. In the Bible, whether it's the parting of the Red Sea or the burning bush, a miracle is something that comes from outside of man, even outside of nature. And this event intrudes into the lives of men and women for the purpose of changing the course of events, changing the inevitable. On the Hallmark Channel. And it doesn't matter what the movie is. It could be Mrs. Miracle. It could be The Dog That Saved Christmas. The miracle doesn't come from outside of man, but comes from within the central character themselves. And it doesn't matter who that protagonist is. That protagonist could be the hardworking single mom with the precocious 10-year-old daughter. It could be the aging golden retriever rescued from the pound. The stories are the same. Events are grim, but a miracle will arise from the goodness of the central character, and goodness will take the day. I don't know if I believe in either of those things. So I'm going to tell you the story of my miracle. And this story is as true as I can make it. None of it has been, no curlicues for your enjoyment. This is the true story. And I guess it began in 2006. I was having a bit of a crisis. I was losing my voice. And I don't mean I was going hoarse. I mean my voice was starting to vanish. Well, this was terrifying for me because as an actor, to be a working actor in Hollywood, you either have to have a voice or well-defined abs. I could not do the sit-ups anymore. I was too tired of doing the crunches. Eventually, my wife says, Stephen, you have to go to a doctor. And I ended up going to a very good one. His name was Sean Nasseri, and he's the doctor who took care of all the American Idol people when they ruined their voice on that show. So Sean looked down my throat, and he said I had a growth on my vocal cord the size of a macadamia nut. Now, it wasn't cancerous. That's good news. He says, but what happened was the growth kept my vocal cords from making contact. No contact, no vibration, no sound. So basically, I needed surgery like yesterday. But it wasn't going to be as simple as just snip, snip, cut, cut, we're fine. The growth had injured the vocal cord, so it was swollen and bruised. So Sean said I had to be absolutely silent for 1 month for the vocal cord to heal. then have surgery, then be absolutely silent for a second month for the surgery for everything to heal. So I would have no talking, no nothing for 2 months. And that's not the miracle. That was difficult, but I will not call that a miracle. Believe me, there's a much better miracle in this story. I wouldn't lead you astray. So, 2 months, no talking, no whispering, no laughing, no sighing or singing. No. Sean gave me a pad of paper and a pen and said if I wanted to communicate, I had to write, and if I got angry, I could write in red ink. You learn a lot about yourself when you have to be silent for a great period of time. The first thing you learn is you didn't have a lot to say to begin with. The world gets along just fine without your input. After about 2 weeks of not speaking and knowing you're not going to speak, your body goes into a completely different rhythm, not one of waiting for when you could talk, but just listening, and you begin to hear what was unheard. And what I began to hear was something far more sinister than anything with my voice. I realized I had headaches. Headaches all the time. Dull, pervasive headaches, morning and night. They even woke me up at night. I just had ignored them for months in all of the noise. I was pretty certain I had a brain tumor. I went to Sean and I wrote on my pad of paper, headaches, probable brain tumor. Sean said he was a throat doctor. He didn't do heads. I had to go see his colleague, the head and neck specialist. And I'm writing head and neck specialist. Who the hell has a head and neck specialist? Sean took the pen and wrote, you do. So I went to his colleague, the head and neck specialist, who took an MRI of my head and neck and x-rays. He brought me back into his office, and there was the ghostly portrait of me on his computer screen. And I did not have a brain tumor. There's a surprise. The reason I had headaches, he said, was that I had arthritis of the neck. Advanced arthritis of the neck. In fact, he said I had one of the worst cases of advanced arthritis of the neck he had ever seen. Now, this is very, very depressing because I figured this guy had done nothing but look at necks most of his adult life. This is the physiology of it all, as he explained it. All of us have a C curve in our cervical spine like so. My arthritis was so bad, it had deformed my neck to where it was the opposite of a human being. The vertebrae were enlarged, overlapping, distended, bone on bone. I left the doctor's office silent and deformed. I went back over to see Sean, and I began to write the long, sad story of my distended vertebra. And he took the pen from me. He said, listen, Stephen, after this surgery, you have got to relax. You are way too stressed, and it's going to hurt the healing process here. You need to go out in nature. Maybe go out and play golf. Obviously, Sean is not a golfer. Nothing relaxing about golf. Golf was invented to ruin good days. But my wife had a great idea. She said, Stephen, this gives us an opportunity to go horseback riding in Iceland. I know that sounds exotic, but it wasn't really. Back then, a trip to Iceland was cheaper than a trip to Dallas, Texas, where my family lived. We loved to ride. Ann and I loved to ride. Our riding coach, our riding teacher, was Icelandic. We had visited him at his home in Iceland. We had ridden there twice, so it was wonderful. And riding could be a very relaxing pastime as long as you wear the right underwear. So this was the trip. We were going to go for 10 days to Iceland, the first 3 days on horseback. and we were with 12 other riders or so, and we were going to herd about 50 loose horses from one part of the island to another part of the island. And in doing so, we were going to go over mountains, through rivers, across plains, and we were going to end up on the side of an active volcano. Sounded dangerous. It was. The very last ride of day 3, my horse, me, was in the lead on the side of the volcano. And we were coming around a trail around the side of the mountain, and I was hit by this enormous wind. Iceland is famous for horrific sudden wind and waves that come off of the Atlantic Ocean. But this wind, I'm not lying, lifted me and the horse off the ground, carried us a few yards, dropped us on the road. My horse took this as God saying, "Giddy up," and he took off. I'm dangling off the side of the saddle, and somewhere on the other side of the mountain, I was thrown onto a hardened lava flow. According to legend, the head of the Icelandic riding group came riding to my rescue with a spare horse. He came over the mountain and saw this vast plain of hardened basalt, and I was lying on the only piece of soft vegetation on the whole rock plain in a fetal position. And according to him, as soon as he rode up, I jumped onto the horse, said I felt sick. He said, "Well, maybe you got hurt in the fall." I said, "What fall?" He said, "Get off of the horse." I have no idea if any of that is true. I can't remember any of it. Somewhere along the way, I suffered a terrible, terrible concussion. I looked at my riding helmet later, and my riding helmet is broken. So I have no idea what happened on the other side of the mountain, except from my wife. What she told me is my consciousness was operating in 60 to 90-second loops over and over again for hours. So now I'm going to tell you my experience of that day. So right before that last ride, I got on the horse and I felt the girth was a little loose, and I asked one of the riding assistants to tighten the girth, which he did, and I looked up and I saw storm clouds coming in over the volcano, and what caught my attention was how quickly they were moving in. And I was wondering if I should put my rain fly over my helmet or not, and then a drop of rain fell in between my glass stem down my cheek, and everything went black. When my vision came back, I was looking at my wife's face, and I said, "Where am I?" She said, "You're in Iceland. You've been thrown from a horse. You're hurt. We're on our way to Reykjavik to x-ray you." And I'm thinking, thrown from a horse? That's like crazy. I'm a pretty good rider. I can't remember being thrown by a horse, and we're going to the hospital? This sounds like it's serious. And wait a minute, did she say something about Iceland? I had so many questions in my head, and I opened my mouth to speak, and I said, "Where am I?" She started speaking again. "You're in Iceland. You've been thrown from a horse. You're injured." And while she's talking, I'm feeling vibration. And I look down with my eyes, and I see I am strapped to a metal gurney. And then I feel that my head is encaged in this metal box that's attached to the gurney, and then I hear a siren, and I'm thinking, my God, I'm in an ambulance. And I'm looking up at my wife's face, and everything goes black. And then when my vision comes back, I'm telling you the absolute truth, I was in Los Angeles. I wasn't dreaming I was in Los Angeles. I was in Los Angeles at a party. And there were people that I knew. There were people I didn't know. Gloria Estefan's CD was playing in the kitchen. I was sitting at a metal patio table that had been spray painted white, and some of the paint had flecked off, and I could see some of the corrosion underneath the paint. And the hostess knew me, and she saw me, and she came over and said, "Stephen, what are you doing here?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't know. I guess I just wanted to tell everyone I'm okay." And she said, Fine. Want anything to drink?" I said, sure, what you got? She said, well, we have iced tea. I said, iced tea is great. I'm dying of thirst. Please, iced tea would be great. She left to go get the iced tea. And I look over at the yard, and there on the edge of the property are a series of rose bushes interspersed with society garlic. And it was a hot day in LA. And the wind shifted, and I'm able to smell that end of summer rose heat interspersed with the garlic. Then she comes back out with the iced tea. The ice clinked in the glass. She hands it to me. I grab the glass. It's cold and wet. A drop of condensation runs down the side of the glass. I go to take a drink. There are a couple flies by the glass, and I brush them away, and I felt the weight of the flies on the back of my hand. And I drank the iced tea, and it was so good. I was so thirsty, and I was a bit overwhelmed, and she said, Stephen, are you all right? I said, it's just this tea. I don't know. I don't know what's happening to me. I'm glad I'm sitting here drinking tea because you will not believe me if I told you where I thought I was and what I thought happened to me. And she said, fine. Want anything to eat? I said, sure. What you got? And she said, hummus and pita bread. I said, I love that hummus. Bring it on. So she goes to get the hummus. I'm drinking iced tea, and I look out, and I see a swimming pool, and the wind shifts, and I smell the chlorine coming off of the water. And I see her winding her way through the crowd, Gloria Estefan playing, and she's bringing me the hummus, and everything goes black. And when I see again, there is my wife's face, and I say, where am I? And she starts again, her litany. You're in Iceland. You've been injured. You've been thrown. I said, that's not what I meant. A new sentence. That got her attention. And she said, well, what do you mean, Stephen? I said, Anne, have I been in the back of this ambulance the whole time with you? And she said, what do you mean? I said, baby, I know this sounds crazy, but I think I was just in Los Angeles. Is it possible I could have disappeared for a short period of time and reappeared back here? Oh my God, the things that went through her eyes. She said, no, we're here. We're here together. So they took me to a hospital in Reykjavik. And there, the young doctor gave me a CAT scan and burned it onto a DVD, which I called Stephen Tobolowsky's Greatest Hit. He said that the tests indicated that I had a fractured vertebra in my neck. And Anne said, what does that mean? Does it mean we go back now? Does it mean we stay in Iceland another 6 months? He says, no. Just enjoy your vacation, the rest of your vacation. Just don't do anything exerting and stay away from the horses. I'm going, no problem there. So they put me in one of those goofy soft collars that they use in sitcoms to indicate people have been injured. And we spent the rest of our time there watching horse shows and eating Icelandic hot dogs, which are the best in the world. I'm afraid the reason is because they're made with the losers of the horse show. I don't know. They don't waste anything in that country. Anyway, Anne and I fly back to America wearing the collar, and we're at Kennedy Airport switching airplanes for Los Angeles, and this older man with a beard comes up to me, gray beard. He recognized me from Deadwood. And he says, so what are you wearing the collar for? You find a way to get around security? I said, well, no, actually, I had fractured a vertebra in my neck over in Iceland, a stupid horse riding accident. He pulled me aside, and he was very serious. He said, I am the head of neurosurgery at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, and you are in the wrong brace. You could die in that brace on the airplane, takeoffs, landings, any sudden turbulence. You need to hold your head. like that the entire flight, all 5 hours. And he says, and when you get back to Los Angeles, somehow, some way, you've got to find a head and neck specialist. It was a miracle. I told him I already had a head and neck specialist from 2 months ago when he x-rayed me with my head and neck when I thought I had a brain tumor. He said, relax, just be quiet, hold your head. Call him when you get home. I got back to Los Angeles, called the head and neck specialist, and this is something I could pass on to you. When you say broken neck, you do move to the front of the line. So, that morning, I go back to the head and neck specialist. They take away the soft collar. They fit me now for the hard brace. Now, I didn't have the halo. I didn't have that thing. But I had a hard brace like so. They took more x-rays. I handed over Stephen Tobolowsky's greatest hit for him to look at on his machine. He looked at it. They called me back in for the doctor's consultation, and he was ashen. He said, you were misdiagnosed in Iceland. You don't have a fracture in your vertebra. Your entire neck is broken. 5 vertebrae, C2 to C6, multiple breaks in each vertebra. And the central vertebra, C4, is crushed. You have a fatal injury. Yes. And I'm like this now. He says, do you want to know why you're alive? Uh-huh. Most people have a curve in their cervical spine like so. Yours was the opposite of a normal human being, so most of the blow went into your shoulders and didn't go into your spinal cord, snapping your neck in two. Your vertebrae were enlarged, overlapping, distended, bone on bone. They acted as armor, protecting you. Your arthritis saved your life. I'm sitting in the doctor's office, having trouble comprehending the mountains of circumstance that allowed me to be here on this day with the potential of seeing my children again. And I had to rethink the definition of miracle and catastrophe. What if miracle and catastrophe are not two separate events on the outskirts of probability, but are actually a single event? And this event is something that doesn't exist outside of nature, but is actually one of the building blocks of nature itself. What if a miracle is the sudden injection of chaos that changes the course of events, that becomes an antidote to fate? For that, I had to ask the doctor, where is a miracle? How do I heal? Is what I asked. How do I heal? He said, well, actually, it's a 3-month process. It's very interesting. What happens is first, the little bits of bone fragment find themselves and put themselves back in place. Then in the 2nd month, it forms a soft bond. 3rd month, it forms a hard bond, and then you're healed. I said, well, that's fascinating. It's amazing, but it's not really the question I asked. It wasn't how long it takes me to be healed, but how does all this happen? How do the little bone fragments know how to find themselves? He said, no one knows that. That's a mystery. So the thing I call miracle was inside of me all along, just like they say on the Hallmark Channel. My entire life, I thought the only way I would see a miracle is with a telescope or a microscope. I didn't know all I needed was a mirror. If the point of a miracle is to change the course of events, then the only question any of us have at any point in time is, what am I going to do today? What am I going to do today to change the inevitable? Or better still, what am I going to do today to create a new inevitable? Now, if this was a story by O. Henry, we would just end it right here. we have reached a sort of satisfying, ironic conclusion. But life ain't literature. I'm sitting in the doctor's office, realizing I'm the luckiest guy in the universe. And I am certain at this point I have experienced a miracle. And it doesn't matter how you parse out that story, whether it's the collusion of cervical vertebra or the astral projection to a party in Los Angeles or just meeting the man from Mount Sinai. Somehow I had experienced a miracle and I was alive because of it. My wife was driving me home. I am fitted for my new hard brace. In 3 months, I'm going to be as good as new. And I had never felt such despair in my life. I couldn't explain it. And as I went home and saw my boy's face, I sunk lower and lower into a dark, dark, dark hole that I had never experienced. And it was terrifying me. I was terrified that I would vanish. So much so that I had to think about it quickly before I was at the end of me. And here is a theory I came up with. That all of us tend to view our lives as a form of simple arithmetic. We are happiest when our lives can be expressed as addition. Stephen plus clean sheets, good. Stephen plus telling stories here at Woodstock, great. Stephen plus the beer I'm probably going to have afterwards, fantastic. So I'm thinking, wait a minute. Even the thought of addition in the future was enough to make me happy, as long as it was something simple like beer. It didn't seem to work for big things like cure for cancer or world peace. That's addition. Subtraction is an entirely different animal. When you are injured, when you have an illness, suffered a loss, or in despair, it's very easy to view your life as a form of subtraction. And even though I was the aforesaid luckiest person in the universe, I was now surrounded by subtraction. I was Stephen minus mobility. I could hardly do anything for myself. Anne had to put on my shoes. She had to help feed me. I was Stephen, obviously, minus work. I couldn't work, which means I was Stephen minus money. We had to use our savings account to pay our bills, and the kitty was getting low. I was fearful for my family. The first corollary of the addition-subtraction theorem, adding fear did not count as addition. Fear seemed to work like a negative number. That when you added fear, it was actually like subtracting. And you could remember it with the simple mnemonic, fear is the opposite of beer. I had a couple other surprises. When you have a broken neck, I don't know if have any of you had a broken neck? Yes, so you know this. When you have a broken neck, you have to stay vertical for 3 months. Vertical. Which means if you feel like you have to sleep, you have to find a wall to lean against, like so, or stuff pillows up here, wedge yourself into a corner to sleep. It is like waiting at a bus stop forever. So I was Stephen minus sleep. I thought, well, maybe I could walk for exercise. No, the hard brace acted like a tourniquet for snake bite. After a few steps, I felt like my head was going to pop. So you hit the total button, and what comes back is a man who is in a sea of subtraction. So, if my theory was true, I had to find a way to turn my life into addition. And it wasn't easy to do because there wasn't much I could do. I thought I could sit. What if I sat in a place I never sat before? So this was the layout of our backyard. We had our porch where where there were benches and chairs, etc. Then there was right off the porch this very wild area that had uncut berry bushes and vines and weeds and wildflowers and overgrown trees. It was a mess. We needed to talk to the gardener about that. Then we had the rose garden, AKA the pet cemetery. Then we had this bearing area that Anne and I euphemistically called the vegetable garden. So I thought, no one had ever sat in that wild, crazy area before. Let me see if that acts as addition. So Anne and I, she helped me, she did. When someone suffers an injury, usually it's the partner that does the heavy lifting. Anne helped me move my bench to the middle of that wild area, and I sat down, and from my new perspective, I was able to see shadows and sunlight move in a completely different way. And when the wind blew, the roses I planted right before I went to Iceland were starting to bloom, and I could smell the roses blooming. It made me feel immediately better, so much so I took my pad and my paper out, and I wrote down, when the problems of your life seem insurmountable, move your bench. My day developed a regular routine. I would eat breakfast, go out to the bench, sit, and survey the world. And even the commonplace seemed like new kinds of addition, but sometimes there were surprises. One morning, I saw a baby bird fall from the tree, fluttering desperately, trying not to hit the ground, and it caught a branch and slowly started to crawl back up the tree, and I'm following it, and a second baby bird falls. And he catches himself, and he starts the long climb up too, and I'm following them up the tree, and there on a higher branch is a big bird on one of the branches, and it pushes off another baby, and it falls. I'm thinking, what is that, a bird bully? What's going on? And the first baby gets up to the top and very calmly walks to the end of the branch, and the big bird pushes it off again. I said, is it Six Flags for birds? No. I was watching a mother bird teach her babies how to fly. It was amazing, and I never would have seen it if I had not moved my bench. This addition thing was kind of working. So I thought maybe there's something else I could add, something else I could do. I could read. But just like the bench, I was going to have to read something I never would have read for a million years. You know, something I always promised myself I'd get to, but never got around to it that way. Years from now, when I walked past the bookshelf and I saw that book there, I would know I read that book at a time in which everything seemed lost. I would have taken my greatest gift, which is time, and I would have honored it with choice. So, the book I picked was the Jewish Talmud. 71 volumes, written 2,000 years ago in Hebrew and Aramaic. Right. I don't speak Hebrew or Aramaic, but I did have the two volumes of the Talmud with English translations. So I thought, let me see if this would work as addition. And I took the Talmud out to the bench, and I sat and I began reading. And my first impression of this book, and it's the Talmud is considered the second holiest set of writings in Judaism except for the Torah. And I'm reading the beginning of the Talmud, I'm thinking, this reads like something that was written 2,000 years ago in Aramaic. I couldn't make heads or tails of the thing. It's circular logic, rabbis yelling at other rabbis, talking about who knows what. I couldn't figure anything out, but hey, I had some time, so I decided I would keep reading. And 2 weeks later, I got my reward. I read a section in the Talmud that took my breath away. It was more than brilliant. It was my life. It said sometimes when you have experienced an injury, an illness, or a loss, it isn't a curse, it's a blessing. Even a divine blessing to help that person see the world with different eyes, for them to rise to a different level of spiritual awareness. And this thing in the Talmud had a name. It was called the afflictions of love. And I thought, oh, dear God, if such a thing were true, the afflictions of love, then I wouldn't have to worry about addition or subtraction. My affliction would be my addition. I I would walk around with it everywhere I went. I would become a mountain of addition. So I sat down and I wrote down in my little book, Afflictions of Love, and just then a seed pod from the magnolia tree fell about 10 feet away from me. Seed pods are about 6 inches long. They're hard as a rock. And falling from 30 or 40 feet, if one of those things hit me in the head, it could end the job that the horse began. So I continue writing about the afflictions of love, and another seed pod falls, and it lands right near the end of my bench. And I look up, and I hear chattering, and there's a squirrel jumping from the magnolia tree to the avocado tree, and I see the squirrel grab a baby avocado, bite through the stem, and throw it at me, and it lands right beside me on the bench. I'm saying, that is no accident. That is Al-Qaeda squirrel. It is a terrorist out to kill me. I run inside. Anne is ironing in the kitchen. I go, Annie, Al-Qaeda squirrel is outside. He's trying to kill me by throwing baby avocados at my head. She said, wear a helmet. Of course, there is no peace without safety. So I take my horse riding helmet, I put it on, use my Talmud for protection, go outside and I grab some kumquats, put them in my top pocket in case I can make a preemptive strike on Al-Qaeda, should he come close enough. So as I pretend to read and I hear chattering, and Al-Qaeda is coming down the tree and he starts staring at me. He's about 20 feet away. So I reach into my pocket and I let him have it. And this is when I realized that when you have a broken neck and you are in a collar, you cannot throw with the speed and accuracy necessary to hit a living squirrel. Al-Qaeda thought I was feeding him. Addition by kumquat for Al-Qaeda squirrel. From then on, whenever I went out, I had to read, I had to toss Al-Qaeda a few kumquats in an attempt of negotiation. But, you know, sometimes you learn hard lessons again and again and again. You cannot negotiate with terrorists. And eventually he began throwing the avocados again. So I call Anne out to get a woman's perspective on what is going on here. So she comes and looks at my bench, looks up at Al-Qaeda squirrel, looks back down, and she says, well, he probably thinks you're trying to challenge him as alpha male for control of the backyard for the females. I said, how could you tell he's even a male? She said, you wanted a female's opinion? Take a look. So I looked, and it's true. He was hung like a woodchuck. So I kept moving my bench further back. Al-Qaeda kept dropping various missiles at me. I moved it back through the vegetable garden, back into a corner of the yard that no one had ever been in. This area of the yard was blocked from the neighbors, from our house, from anything. And most importantly, I was far enough away from the tree to where Al-Qaeda squirrel could not drop things on me anymore. Now he had to hurl things at me. And I just didn't know he had that weaponry. So I start reading the Talmud again, and I'm distracted. And then I see movement in my peripheral vision. Then I see flashes of color. I see purple, and I see bright yellow. And I look up, and the back of the magnolia tree is covered with wild parrots. And then my mind goes back 35 years to when I first came out to Los Angeles, and there was the apocryphal story of a fire in a pet store, where the pet store owner, he was able to save all of his dogs and cats, but he couldn't save all the birds. But he opened the cages and tried to shoo them out, and the legend was that somewhere in Studio City, there was a flock of wild parrots still living. Not only was the apocryphal true, they were living in my tree. And I never would have seen them if I hadn't moved my bench. The last blessing that came to me over this difficult 3-month period of time came to me via messenger. It was a television script for a new show called Glee. The producers thought I would be right for the singing, dancing pedophile in the script. again. Well, my agent called up and said, well, do you feel up for an audition? I said, I'm going in whether I feel up for it or not because it'll at least be audition by audition. He goes, what? Never mind. So I put the Talmud down, picked up Glee. Oh, what a falling off was there. And I began reading Glee, and I was heartened by the message of the script. It was very life-affirming. And as I'm reading it and working on my part, I see a shadow kind of flying over the yard, over my script, and I don't even look up because I know from the shape of the wings and the flight pattern and how it was dipping and moving that it was one of the parrots coming back to live in my tree. And I thought, you know, that's the nature of all miracles. It's easy to recognize the shadow once you've seen the real thing. And I stood up, and I looked at my backyard, and it was filled with shadows and sunlight. And I had always been one of these people that thought the shadows were just another part of the darkness. But what if just one of these shadows was like the parrots, the shadow of a miracle unobserved? And just like that, my vision changed. I've never been able to see the world the same again. And I don't know what happened to me that day. I cannot explain it. Maybe I was just happy to be alive. Maybe I was giddy that I finally had an audition. Or maybe, just maybe, I got a parting gift from the afflictions of love. Thank you. Thank you.